Hello, hello, everybody. Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I want to say hello to my father, Rabbi Friedman, who is in New York. And we go coast to coast and say hello to Mr. Louie Kemp, who is on the left coast. Correct? Where are you? You in
That's
LA?
correct. I'm in LA.
Very nice. So we have the whole country covered. The whole country covered. Welcome. Thank you guys for doing this. Louie, we're doing this because, first of all, you and my father have been friends for so many years. And now the whole world knows it because you wrote this amazing book titled Dylan and Me, right? This book behind me, 50 Years of Adventures. Can you believe it's been 50 years? How did that
It's
happen?
amazing. It's amazing. That's what I want to know. I didn't think I was that old.
Well, at my high school math tells me since you met him at age 11, you look good for 61.
Thank you. If that's how old I really was, I would agree with you.
So you grew up and you knew a kid named Bobby Zimmerman. You met him in summer camp. What what was it? I grew up in St. Paul, and the rest of the world used to talk about the Jewish community of St. Paul as being tiny and flyover country. I now live in Birmingham, Alabama, where it's even worse. But I don't know. You grew up in Duluth. What was it like growing up as a Jew in Duluth, and how did that affect your friendship with a kid from Hibbing?
Yeah. So, of course, Duluth had a small Jewish community, uh, but there was a couple thousand Jews in Duluth when I was growing up. Out of 100,000 people, but it was a tight community. Bobby was born in Duluth, but his family moved 75 miles north to Hibbing when he was 6. And that was really a small Jewish community. There was maybe a couple hundred Jews up there. But Bobby and I met at a Jewish camp, Herzl Camp in northern Wisconsin. And that was a place where we really got a good dose of Judaism. And we went there for 5 years. So it had a profound effect on us Jewishly.
And growing up as a sorry for interrupting, growing up as a Jewish kid in Duluth, did you feel like you were part of a special Jewish community? Was it more difficult because it was smaller, or better because it was smaller?
Well, because it was small, we had the AZA, the Jewish Boys Organization, BBG, the Girls Jewish Organization, and they were very active, and we were active in them. So, amongst our Jewish community, we did a lot of things together. But of course, we went to schools that were 98% non-Jewish, and so we lived in both worlds, very much so. But we had strong Jewish identities. Both of our families were conservative, so we went to the high holidays services, and celebrated Hanukkah and Passover. But as part of a greater non-Jewish community, everyday wise.
Right. Do you think growing up Jewish in northern Minnesota had an impact on Bob and his journey?
Yeah, for sure. It affects you up there. I mean, well, you're surrounded by people who are hardworking, honest, decent, non-Jewish people. But uh, I personally never had any problems being Jewish up there from non-Jews, and neither did Bobby. We were both very well accepted, and even looked. People thought, "Geez, you're Jewish. What is it like to be Jewish?" And we, to our limited degree of knowledge, we would tell them. But yeah, we got great respect up there.
So you met Bobby Zimmerman at Camp Herzl, which I imagine is a camp that drew kids from all over the Midwest. And you tell us some stories in the book about him. Anything you want to tell us about camp with?
Yeah. So
not in the book?
yeah, well, I'll just say that Bobby Zimmerman, who was my friend, is Bobby Zimmerman, not Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan is his professional persona. I never related to that. I always saw him and still see him as Bobby Zimmerman. When he gets on stage, he's Bob Dylan. When he's with me or one of his friends, he's Bobby Zimmerman. Totally different people. And but at that camp, the first year, Bobby, me, and Larry Keegan from St. Paul were in the same cabin, and we were the three troublemakers and rebel rousers, and we hit it off, immediately. And unfortunately, Larry in later life became a quadriplegic, but it never affected our friendship, and it never affected Larry's determination to make a meaningful life for himself, which he did. So, but at camp we did wild, crazy things. One incident, and it's in the book, is one night we raided the cabin next door because those were the kids that were perfect. They did everything right. We raided them with shaving cream on their faces while they were sleeping, and of course we got caught because they figured out right away who else would have the guts to do that, and they marched us through the woods, all night as punishment. And at one point, they gave us a rest. We at a bonfire. We said, "This is for the birds," and we started running. And one of the counselor's cars was there, and we jumped in and we took off with the car, and it took off outside the campgrounds. Obviously, we had the good sense to come back, and the rabbi had Rachmanis on us and let us stay. But yeah, we did a lot of interesting, fun things. We were just regular, good, all-American Jewish boys with a wild streak.
So you had fun. It was a wild streak, but you obviously you knew you were Jewish. It stayed with you.
Yes.
You went down to Minneapolis for university.
Yes.
You went down to Florida for university. But somehow your Jewish identity stayed with you.
Always. I had a strong Jewish identity. And as you can see, I always wore a Star of David. And long before I became observant, because I wore my Jewishness, on my chin. It was a matter of pride and strong identity. Even though I wasn't religious, I had a strong Jewish identity and pride.
So speaking of chin, you can follow the dates in the book by the pictures of your beard or lack thereof.
You're right.
So actually, your journey as your Jewish involvement went in one direction, while Bob's went in a completely different direction. Tati, I'm gonna refer to Rabbi Friedman as Tati. He's my father. Do you remember the first time you went up to Duluth?
I don't remember which was the first time, but I went up quite a few times.
Yes.
But Sukkot I remember very clearly. The wedding I remember very clearly.
Sukkot in Duluth. In the Twin Cities, we used to get snow in our sukkah. A sukkah in Duluth must be a igloo.
Actually, the day I was there, it was quite warm. It was nice. I'm having a sukkah party. You had a massive sukkah.
Yes.
Built like a bomb shelter.
Yes.
So what brought you up to Duluth?
Louie.
So Louie, you were already on your journey. How did you go from an international fish expert and character and a best friend, of course, to Bob Dylan, to a traditional Jew?
Well, we can thank your dad, your Tati, for that. What happened was I was living at that time in Los Angeles, in Brentwood, with Bobby at a house there. He invited me to move in with him. He was at that time had already started studying the New Testament, and he was he was into it. He was reading it all the time, and it had an effect on him. So I'd been in the house with him a couple months, and then I took a trip back to Minnesota to see my mother in Duluth. So I called my friend Larry Keegan, and I said, "Larry, I'm going to be between planes in the Twin Cities for about an hour and a half. If you want to come out and say hello." He said, "Sure, I'll be there." I had previously told Larry that I had these questions about the meaning of life, and and I was looking for somebody who would give me the answers about the meaning of life, because everybody I knew thought life was just a big party and self-indulgent affair, and I knew it, and my neshama and my head told me that I wasn't just sent here to make all the money I could and have all the fun I could. It seemed empty to me. So when I got off the plane in Minneapolis, at the door of the plane was Larry in his wheelchair, his Mexican helper Alfonso,
remember Alfonso.
Yeah, remember Alfonso? Who we later dubbed the Holy Fonz because he would always put filling on Larry and knew about everything because he was around
Uh-oh.
us all the time. And what happened is Larry, when he knew I was coming, he had met Rabbi Friedman at some event in the Twin Cities, was very impressed with him. And he called him up and said, Rabbi, a good friend of mine is going to be at the airport for an hour or so. He asked questions about the meaning of life as a Jew. Would you be so kind as come to the airport with me and answer his questions? And your father had been teaching all day at Beis Hana. Beis Hana was on. It was in these late December. It was cold as H outside. But your dad had worked all day teaching. So instead of going home to his wife and his 14 kids, he agreed to come to the airport to meet a Jew he'd never met before in miserable weather. So I saw the rabbi there where he said, "This is Rabbi Friedman. You should ask him those questions that you claim you have about life." So I said, "Great." So we went and we sat down. And the best way I can describe it is like this. I had good questions, but Rabbi Friedman had great answers. So every time he answered one of my questions, he kind of blew me away and really got my attention. And one of my questions was, I know I'm writing up a big tab with God for all the good fortune he's given me. I know it's not luck. I know it's a blessing from God. I had that understanding, and your dad said, "You're right. It's not luck. You've been given this by God." And I said, "I want to know how I can start paying God back." So just when I said that to him, the loudspeaker went off, and they called my flight to Duluth. And I said, "Geez, Rabbi, I'd like to continue this, but my flight's going to Duluth." He said, "Well, I'm in session now. I'm teaching for another 3 weeks. If you want to come down for a couple of days and sit in my classes, and I'll meet with you at night afterwards and answer any questions, why don't you do that?" So that's what happened. I came back and I went to Beis Hana, and when I walked into class with Larry, after about 10 minutes, I nudged him. I said, "Larry," there was about 50 people in the class. I said, "There's all women here. There's no guys." He said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you. He teaches women." He says, "You're the first guy he invited to come." So instead of staying 3 days, I stayed 3 weeks. My mom didn't make any dummies, and but it was wonderful. And that's where education about Yiddishkeit. And your dad was so kind after teaching all day, he would sit with me and answer my personal questions. So at the end of the 3 weeks, he said to me, the classes were over, he said, "If you look in the mirror, you may think you look the same. But inside, you got to be an entirely different person from what you've learned for the last 3 weeks." I said, "You're right." He said, "So what are you going to do about it?" I said, "I don't know." Then he said to me, "There's 613 commandments." I said, "Oh, stop. I said, "You got to know who you're talking to. I grew up in Duluth and no Jewish education. The only reason I know about the 10 commandments is because of the movie, and I can't even keep all of them." So he paused and he stroked his beard maybe for 45 seconds, didn't say a word, just stroked his beard and was thinking and looking at me. And then he says to me, "There's 5 commandments. If you keep these 5 commandments, you'll start to pay back that tab that you told me you knew you were running up with God for your good fortune. And it will change your whole relationship with God." So he told me what the 5 commandments were. You want to find out what they are, you got to read the book. And after he told me, and then I pondered for about 30, 40 seconds, thinking about what he had just told me. He also explained to me what each one meant and how it would affect me in every respect, spiritually and mystically and every which way, which was all like amazing to me. And then after 45 seconds, I said, okay, I'm going to do it. He said, when do you want to start? I said, right now. He said, okay. He said, come back here tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock and I'll set you up. I came back, he gave me tzitzis, gave me tefillin, gave me a siddur, gave me books about keeping kosher, about keeping Shabbos. I walked out there like this, and it was it. Never looked back. And cold turkey, I became observant.
It's amazing. What year was this, do you think?
This was 1981. Yeah, 1981. That's 39 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Seems like yesterday. So when I went back to live in the house with Bobby in Brentwood, it was very interesting dynamics. Bobby was in one room studying the New Testament, and I was in another room studying the Torah. And then we'd meet in the kitchen and try to, persuade each other about what we had learned, And I saw very quickly that he had been doing this for months. I was a real newbie, And so when he threw things at me, from quoting from the New Testament, I didn't have the knowledge to counter him on a knowledgeable basis. So I went in another room after one of these sessions. And I called your father, and I said, Manas, and I didn't tell him who my friend was. I said, I live with a friend, a Jewish friend, who studies the New Testament. And I don't have the wherewithal to counter his arguments. Would you do me a favor if I fly you out here to come and meet with him and, teach him Yiddishkeit, teach him Torah? He said, sure, I'd be happy to. I said, okay, I'll get back to you. So the next day I says to Bobby, I said, my rabbi's going to be in LA next week. And would you like to meet with him? He's very interesting and knowledgeable. He says, yeah, sure, bring him over to the house. So I said, okay. So I went back to my room. I called Manas. I said, Manas, can you come out next week? He said, sure. So we picked a day, and I got him a ticket, and I picked him up at the airport. I brought him to the house, and Bobby really liked him. And, of course, we all know, what a brilliant Torah scholar your dad is. So whatever Bobby would bring up, Manas knew how to counter it, but in a very humble way, in a way so that he wasn't being talked down to, that felt like an easy from the Torah and the Mishnah. This is what we learned from thousands of years of experience, and that was the beginning of the process of bringing Bobby to Yiddishkeit, and I credit your father with very much making that happen.
It's amazing. I want to get back to the airport in a second, but Louie, usually people have these soul searching questions when something dramatic happens in their life. Sometimes, unfortunately, a tragic event. But you seem to be doing well. You were flying all over the world. You're hanging out with the hotshots. What brought this about?
Oh yeah, I was on top of the world. I had made a lot of money. I had all the material trappings that go with it. Hanging out with all the beautiful people. But the Jewish neshama inside me knew better than anybody in my head. And my Jewish neshama started working on me and saying, "Schmuck, what are you doing here? This isn't for a nice Jewish boy. You're missing out here. You're not feeding me your soul. You're taking good care of your body, but you're not feeding your soul. I need some attention too." And it got my attention, and that's what
kudos to you for listening. So this was back in the days. Remember the days when you could meet somebody at the gate? Well, remember the days when we used to fly? But before that, remember the days when you could meet somebody at the gate? So
right.
Todd, do you remember that meeting at the airport in more or less the same way? You could just walk up to the gate and meet your rabbi.
And you can find a place to sit quietly and talk.
Yeah. And so then he flies you out to California. And did you know who Bob Dylan was when you met him?
A little bit. Not really.
And so the relationship started. You started teaching him Torah. How did that work out?
I wouldn't call it teaching. We started talking, and his neshama was just as alive, maybe even more, because he did have a desperate need, because he had just gotten divorced. So didn't really have to say much. The Jew in him was right there under the surface.
Do you remember some of the things that he asked you that sort of helped him find his way?
I'll tell you one little incident. When I arrived at the house, the woman missionary, what was her name?
Well, was it Clyde was there?
Maybe, yeah. Well, she happened to pop in to visit. They hadn't seen each other in a while.
Oh, that was Mary Alice. Mary Alice.
Ah,
yeah.
So she had attracted him to Christianity, and they hadn't seen each other for a while. And all of a sudden, she shows up, like hashgacha pratis, and like the one day that I show up, she shows up. So she comes out of the room, and he introduces her to me, or me to her, and she puts her hand out, like shake hands. And she has this big Bible under her arm, with the gold
embroidery.
And I said, I'm sorry, we don't shake hands. It's against the Bible. Anyway, she left, and Dylan loved it. He just loved that little exchange over there. So he just opened up, and we started talking about his childhood, and it was a pleasure.
And Louie, you note in the book that on stage, Mr. Bob Dylan doesn't do a lot of talking. But from the relationship I remember with my father, Ty, when he came, he doesn't stop talking.
Yeah, because that's Bobby Zimmerman.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bobby Zimmerman talks to his friends and teachers and people he likes. Bobby Dylan on stage just sings. He doesn't talk. Yeah.
So what do you remember about his visits to our house? First thing. What? Huh?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
You're asking me? I just remember being afraid of this guy I didn't know, and he looked scary. But I just remember him sitting and you guys just talking for a long time. Besides his big dog.
I thought for sure you were going to say the first thing you remember is Babe.
Absolutely. The big
biggest dog we've ever seen.
Dog bigger than me. Yeah. But he would talk, right? And he wasn't bashful, and he was listening. And he followed you to Minnesota. I mean, he had a place in Minnesota, but the relationship continued into Minnesota.
Well, he would come to visit his mother, I don't know, a few times a year.
Yep.
While he was there, he would come down to St. Paul.
It's not an easy drive. For those of you who are wondering, it's not like it's around the corner.
Sometimes he would come on motorcycle. But
Bobby always had a lot of good questions when it came to spirituality. And your father he found to be a great source of knowledge to answer those questions.
And did his conversations with you, Louie, did they continue?
Oh yeah. Yeah. After Manas went back, we would continue, and then I introduced him to other Orthodox people as well. Rabbi Shlomo Schwartz, Schwartzy, and in LA, but then later on to Rabbi Feller in St. Paul, who Manas worked with there at the Chabad house, and other Mayor Rhodes. Different types of Orthodox Jews that I thought he would feel comfortable with, and they all added something to the Jewish pie for him.
That's amazing. Now, in the book, you talk about his mother because you're very close to the family. But is his mother's name Beatty?
Yes, Beatty.
Betty. Okay, Beatty.
No, Beatty, right.
And so, Ty, you're friends with this mythical creature called Bob Dylan, and it's really quiet. Not everybody knows about it. But then he endorses your book. And all of a sudden, the connection between Rabbi Friedman and Bob Dylan is no longer a secret. What brought him to do that?
As far as I can understand, when you grow up in Hibbing, where life is just plain normal, sane, decent, people were people. They had problems. What did his father was suffering from? Polio? Louie?
Well, his father got polio when Bob was like 5, 6 years old. That's why they moved to Hibbing, right?
Yeah. So, life was serious, but it was real. And all of a sudden, he finds himself in California, in Hollywood, which is anything but real. And the contrast was just shocking. And he could see through it. In other words, his healthy upbringing, small town living, just wouldn't accept all that Narishkeit and all that fake, put on. He couldn't stand it. So anything authentic, he was drawn to. He loved it. And authentic somehow ended up meaning nonconformist. Makes sense, right? If the whole world is fake, then the only way to find something real is to be a nonconformist. He had a very great respect for his grandfather. He admired his grandfather a lot. And his grandfather was a nonconformist. He did his own thing, lived his own way. And so when he looked at marriage, it was not from a Hollywood perspective. Relationships to him was what you do in Hibbing, not what you do in Malibu. And the book reminded him of that. The good old-fashioned, solid human interactions that are real and sincere and vulnerable.
You're talking about the book that you published in 1991, of course, called "Why Doesn't Anyone Blush Anymore?" So it's about marriage, but it was really about being true to yourself, being real.
Being real, yeah, having real values.
So, Louie, in your book, what struck me throughout the book is the fact that you remained, you shall pardon the phrase, sane while hanging out with all the Mishigoyim that populate the beautiful people. And you mentioned that growing up in Hibbing in northern Minnesota helped Bob. You mentioned a work ethic, right? It gave him a real work ethic. But I just heard my father say that it also gave him sort of a core to his soul that could not be extinguished.
Yeah, growing up in Duluth, northern Minnesota, had the same effect on me. I was around real people, without crazy ideas and stuff. We dealt with our problems in a honest, straightforward way, and with each other that way. And I came from just like he did. We both came from very solid families, hardworking, decent, spiritual people. Who had our ancestors had emigrated from Eastern Europe, and gave us the foundation of values that we carried through our life. Even when we ended up in California, we could see through the nonsense when there was nonsense, and we didn't embrace it. We laughed at it. And neither of us were impressed. Even though he turned out to be one of the most famous people, neither one of us were impressed with famous people, and he wasn't impressed with himself either, by the way, being famous. He used to tell me, when they tried to talk to him like he was a prophet and a Messiah and all this nonsense, he would say, I don't get any of the credit. I'm just a conduit. This is all a gift from God, and I just write it down, and he had that understanding, very early. I think it came from his family and his upbringing, and it's where we came from.
It's amazing. I think that Dylan fans will be amazed by reading your book at a side of Bob Dylan that I don't think anybody knows, and that is the part that you just described. The fact that there's a real person in there, and not just a caricature of, of Bob Dylan. You took him. When was it? When was he famously photographed wearing tefillin at the Kotel?
So that was that was in the 80s when his one of his sons had a bar mitzvah. He took him there for a bar mitzvah, and he was wearing tefillin at the hotel during the bar mitzvah. Yeah.
Right. So I mean, so you describe, the parts of sort of behind the scenes of all of his smash hit albums, and of course the Rolling Thunder review. I mean, anybody who knows anything about Bob Dylan will really, really enjoy this book. But then you also give us a side of Bob that we only saw in snapshots, like OMG, there he is wearing tefillin at the Kotel, and you took him to the Rebbe. How did that happen?
Yeah, so part of the process after he studied, and that was a continuous thing. He would stay with your father, both in L.A. and in Minnesota, which he used to spend a fair amount of time, by the way. And then, as through that evolution, he learned about the Rebbe through your father and me, and Rabbi Feller. And he said, I said to him, "You want to go meet the Rebbe? You want to go to New York?" He said, "Sure." So we went to Crown Heights. And on multiple occasions, and your father used to be the interpreter during these Friedmans, but so we'd go to these huge Friedmans with 3,000 people at 770. You couldn't even move there, and Larry and Bobby and I would get in, and it was all in Yiddish. We couldn't understand the word, but we could feel the holiness of what was going on, being in the presence of the Rebbe, and his voice and his eyes and the reaction of the other people. And so we would stand there for hours listening to the Rebbe for bring without understanding the words. And I remember one time the Rebbe, he saw us there, and he probably was told by Rabbi Krinsky or Rabbi Groner, that Bob Dylan was there. Didn't mean anything to him, I mean, he looks at the spiritual side of people, not the material or famous side. So to one of those Verbringens, the Rebbe had a glass in his hand with mashka, and he stood up. And he looked directly at Larry, who I was on one side, Bobby was on the other side, looked him, his eyes to his eyes, raised his glass and said, "L'chaim," right to Larry. Everybody in the place could see that it was to Larry, not to us or anybody else. And it was quite a stunning experience. And afterwards, Bobby said to me, "I think the Rebbe really likes Larry." I said, "Yeah, for sure he does." It's obvious the Rebbe looks into a person's neshama and sees who they are according to his neshama, not to any material thing. Bobby said to me, "I think we better work on it neshamas more," and we both agreed on that, and we tried to do that, and we did do that. And then Bobby went on another occasion, and there's actually a picture online of Bobby talking to the Rebbe, receiving $1 from him.
So you mentioned Larry Keegan throughout your book, and Larry is another amazing personality. And you get to know him a little bit in the book. But Tati, you want to tell us? I knew Larry most of all of the three of them, because obviously he lived in St. Paul. But I was a kid. I didn't really know who I was dealing with. I didn't even know that Larry went to the Rebbe with you guys. So, Ty, you want to tell us a little bit about Larry Keegan just for a moment?
I think it was a Shavuos, if I'm not mistaken, some Yom Tov, because there was Kaishel Bracha. At the end of a long Fabrengen, everyone would file past the Rebbe, and the Rebbe would pour a little wine from his cup into your cup and say L'chaim. That would take hours. Larry was there in his wheelchair, and they swept him up onto the stage, onto the platform, and they took him past the Rebbe in his wheelchair, and he's a quadriplegic. He can't even cough by himself.
Right.
And you know what the Rebbe said to him? Besides l'chaim, the Rebbe said to him, "Don't depend on anybody." It's like, what? And that's it. They moved him along. The line was moving. And for a long time, we was like, what does that mean? I'm dependent constantly on everybody. But it did something to him. It gave him a whole new lease on life. Because around that time, his kidneys failed and he had to be on dialysis on top of everything else. And that was like, it could have been the final straw. But he bounced back. Like he was down for about 3 days. This is already too much. 3-4 days later, I see him and he's back to his own self. Yeah, it took 2 more hours every morning to get out of bed. But once he got out, life was good. It was amazing.
And he would have his helper put the filling on him every day.
Alfonso.
Yeah.
The Holy Fonz.
Right.
I don't mean to introduce a totally foreign subject into this, but Louie, you told us a story about your mother that just blew me away. The brilliance of a Yiddish mama, with your draft when you went to the draft.
Yes.
It should have been in the book.
No, it's in the book, Rabbi. It's in the book. It's in the latter part of the book. It's right towards the end. I put it in. I couldn't leave it out. It was just too it told so much about her, and it also told so much about my upbringing too. By that time, I was 20 years old. She told me I still, I would listen to her. Nowadays, try to get a 20-year-old to listen to their mother, or I think it was 22 by then.
For those of us in flyover country, you want to tell us the story?
Well, it's in the book. I'll give you the short version of it. But what happened was I had transferred from the University of Minnesota to the University of Miami. I was going to college down there. I had a draft deferment for being a student back in those days. Everybody got drafted unless you had a student deferment or a physical problem. And so I had my student deferment, but because I had transferred back and forth, I was the 4 years were up, and I still had another semester to go. And she calls me one day and she said, "Louie, I just got a draft notice for you at the house." She said, "Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it." I said, "What do you mean you'll take care of it? It's the United States government. You can't. This isn't like bringing smoked fish to my teachers to get me out of trouble after I beat somebody up. This doesn't work with the U.S. government." She said, "No, I'll take care of it. I'll get back to you." She calls me back a week later and said, "Okay, I'm sending you out special delivery." That was a big deal back then. By the post office, you could get it like in a few days. It was expensive. There was no Federal Express back then. And she says inside there will be an envelope from Dr. Harrington, who was our family doctor for forever. They even did house calls. Try and get a doctor to do house calls. Now in Duluth, he did house calls. Yeah? That's how close everybody was, and that's kind of relationship people had back then. They cared about each other. So she said, "But you can't open it. The information about where you're supposed to go for your draft physical is in the envelope from the draft board. When you go there, hand this envelope to the draft doctor. But I don't want you to open it before you go there." I said, "Mom, I can't. They think I'm a sissy. I can't come with an envelope to my doctor. I mean, they don't care about that." And I started arguing with her, and I wasn't going to do it. And she knew how to handle me, of course. So I was a strong, vibrant young guy, tough guy, and so she pulled out her trump card. Her trump card wasn't Donald. It was. She started to cry. Oh, that was it. she started to cry. I'm done. Okay, stop crying. I'll do whatever you say. And I think that's in the Jewish Mother's Handbook 101. I think. And that was it. I promised her. I went to the. I had to show up at the Miami Armory, and there was 1,000 guys there. Big lines. They sent you into another room to take off all your clothes except for your skivvies, and stand in line until it was your turn. And so I was in one of the lines, and I could see. I got close to the front. Everybody got past. You have to be dead not to pass this physical. Open your mouth. To put the stick in. They hit your knee with a rubber thing. Whether it moved or not, great. And then the guy had a stamp there. You had to hand him your draft card. So you hand him your draft card after this 1 minute physical. He'd stamp it. 1A. That means you start packing. You're going to Vietnam. And that was it. So when I got there, he put me through the same thing. And he was about to pick up the stamp to stamp my draft card, and I had this envelope in my hand. I figured, I promised my mother I got to do it. I said, "Excuse me. Here, I have an envelope from my doctor." He looked at the envelope from your doctor. He grabbed it out of my hand. He tore it open, went like this, started reading it, and then he starts screaming at me. He says, "Who the hell do you think you are? The U.S. Army doesn't make any exceptions for anybody." And he looked behind him, and on the shelf behind him there was another stamp. He took that one out, put it in the ink pad, then stamped my draft card. It was 6E. To this day, I don't know what that means. Nobody I ever met could tell me what I think 6E or 6J. Nobody knows what that means. And then he came back, and everybody's looking at me, and so I picked up the letter. I went out, I read it, and I was in shock. It said, "To whom it may concern, Louis Kemp is very happy to go in the Army. In fact, he wants to go in the Army, but he has a medical problem that you have to be aware of. He's allergic to wool, and you have to give him a silk uniform, or otherwise he'll break out in rashes and hives. And as his doctor, and allow him to go in unless you give him a silk uniform." The guy read that, he went crazy, and didn't get Louie Kemp a silk uniform when everybody else has a wool uniform. That was it. And all the way back to my apartment in Coral Gables, in Coconut Grove, I just couldn't believe it. I was in shock. I got home, I called my mother. Before I could say anything, she says to me, "I know they don't want you, right?" I said, "Yeah." She says, "Always listen to your mother." And that was it. I never heard from her.
Unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable.
Brilliant.
It shows the brilliance of a Jewish mother and determination. And I was allergic to wool. How they got the silk language in there, I don't know, between the doctor and her, who came up with that. But that's what happened.
Unbelievable.
That's amazing.
Really,
Foster Brooks says, the 6 is a number. What does E stand for? And the guy said, E stands for even if there's an invasion, don't come.
they didn't want me.
Was your mother a native Minnesotan?
So my mother was actually born in Poland, came over to the United States into Chicago. Her parents had come ahead of her, and she brought her over right after the First World War. And she was a young girl, maybe 14 years old, grew up in Chicago. My father was born in Poland. His family moved to Duluth. And through mutual friends, my father and mother met, and she moved. They got married, and she moved to Duluth.
But you don't do it for your bashert.
Yep.
To Duluth. Is there still a thriving fishing industry in Duluth?
Unfortunately not. No, because the lake went through a lot of changes. It was there used to be 10 million pounds of Lake Superior fish taken out of sold commercially. Thousands of fishermen. Now there's nothing.
Right. So going back to what we were talking about earlier, Tati, do you remember Bob Dylan's connection to the Rebbe? What was his reaction to meeting the Rebbe?
In general, a chassid's relationship to the Rebbe is private, and of all the things in his life, he wanted to keep that private, like every other chassid. But I know that he was absolutely in awe of the Rebbe. When he heard the Rebbe wasn't feeling well, he flew to New York to see what's going on. So there was something very special there. I don't know, the Rebbe reminded him of his grandfather. The Rebbe was the ultimate reality, true, unadulterated, authentic Jew. He loved it. But what went on between them is like any other chassid. It's his to preserve.
But there's no question he respected and loved the Rebbe, and the Rebbe had a big influence on his life as he did on all of ours. Because the Rebbe was authentic. You could see he was authentic. The people we were hanging out with in Hollywood, you could see they weren't authentic. The Rabbi was authentic. And we were craving that, yeah.
Louie, what comes across in the book is you don't really know the man, Bobby Zimmerman, from Bob Dylan. There's so much more going on behind the scenes. It's amazing.
We don't really even know his name. Everybody says, oh, I know his real name. His real name is Zimmerman. His real name is Shapsi Zush.
That's right. That's his Hebrew name, given at his bris. That was the name given to him at his bris. That's his real name.
He reads Hebrew like a yeshiva bacher, because he got his bar mitzvah lesson from an Orthodox retired rabbi from Borough Park, who came out for 1 year to be in Hibbing, the year of his bar mitzvah.
In Hibbing, not even Duluth.
In Hibbing.
Oh, that's where he was at.
Remember the rabbi's name?
I can't. I got it written down sometime, but he appeared, and then after the bar mitzvah, he disappeared, and it was Bobby said it was like a miracle.
Yep, it was his bar mitzvah gift.
From Hashem.
Yeah. But, we thought, ask him to read from the Siddur and call him up to the Torah. Can you say it in English? What? He reads like a yeshiva boy.
Louie, you have an amazing memory, because the stories in the book are so vibrant and so vivid. It's amazing. But
that's for me to eat a lot of fish. All my life I ate a lot of fish. Good for the memory and many other things.
Fresh from the lake. But for the Bob Dylan fans in the world, obviously this book is a gem. But what do you think this book says to Jewish kids who are growing up today in small towns or even in big towns, but growing up American? What do you think they'll get from this book?
What I can tell them is that Torah and Judaism are our heritage, and we're thrown into this wild, crazy world. Look what's going on now. The only thing that separates us from other people is our Torah values and our Torah, and to learn about that and to live according to that is what binds us together and is our protection against getting confused and getting mixed up in this world. And so when Bobby and I had the chance to learn Torah, it gave us a sense of knowledge, a blueprint, to deal with things in a meaningful way. And I suggest that to all Jewish kids. Doesn't mean you have to become religious, but you should have that knowledge and understanding the knowledge of your ancestors, the heritage of your ancestors, being a Jew is a special opportunity and a special responsibility, and you better know what it's all about so you can make informed decisions.
Yes, absolutely.
I would say another lesson is that no matter how great the insanity is, no matter how overwhelming it seems to be, a little bit of MS, a little bit of truth, a little bit of sanity is more powerful. You can overcome it all.
I agree.
You just have to be raised in Hibbing. That's
Or Duluth,
or Duluth.
But remember Professor Vovel Green, Olav Shalom, used to say, you Hasidic rabbis have to take off your black coats and put on doctor's lab coat. People will listen to you more because people tend to. But see, here we have the story of the one, the only Bob Dylan, and yet it shows a mensch and it shows a deep Jewish soul. What's the message there for American Jews?
A little bit of truth.
Louie?
I would say, don't let the outside world penetrate the truth. Don't buy the Western blueprint of truth. Search for yourself, and if you're Jewish, search in your religion, because we, the Jewish people, have more experience, more knowledge, and understanding about the world than anybody else. And everybody else has taken something from us here and something from us there, and made a religion out of it. But we got the real deal, and we got the close relationship with God. And if we follow our own Torah, we'll have a meaningful, protected, enlightened life. You don't have to look anywhere else, and you don't have to be religious to do that. You just have to take the time to learn what the Jewish knowledge is all about, which prepares us for life and protects us. Coming from you, that's a big compliment. Thank you, Rabbi. I learned from you, Rabbi. You're my teacher. You're my rabbi.
Is it amazing to either of you that this message is coming from the voice of the generation, from the Messiah of the 60s? And yet what you just said is so right on.
Why is that surprising?
Yeah, that shouldn't surprise you. I mean, for people to consider Bobby the Messiah, of course, he knows he's not, but it shows that they respect, the gift that God gave him. How God told Abraham he's going to bless the nations through your seed. So Bobby is one of the incarnations of that blessing. So Bobby was given this gift to share these amazing songs and insights and values with the rest of the world, because he's a Jew, and he knows that. He knows that this is a gift, and so he was chosen to be the conduit for it. So you go back to his early songs all the way through, you see the spirituality in his songs. Highway 61 Revisited. God said to Abraham, kill me a son. Where should that killing be done? Do it on Highway 61. Well, that's Bobby's touch on it, but he invokes God right in the beginning of his career and all the way through.
Right. You start the book with your meeting Bobby Zimmerman in camp and your shenanigans in camp, and I hope people realize the absolute critical role that summer camp plays for Jewish kids. And this summer is going to be a real challenge because a lot of kids are not having that experience this summer. It's just such an amazing opportunity. First of all, for a kid from Duluth to meet a kid from St. Paul and so on and so on. But just it's such an important opportunity. It's such an important part of a Jewish kid growing up.
Had a big influence on us. We went there for 5 years. It was Orthodox Rabbi Zvi Dershowitz from the Twin Cities, who was the director. It was our first experience of keeping Shabbos and singing Hebrew songs and getting indoctrinated about Israel. It changed it. Those values that we learned at that Jewish camp have stuck with us forever, as well as the friendships that we have made there. of course, Bobby, Larry, and I, but I'm friendly with 4 or 5 other kids I met at Herzl Camp to this day.
Everything I needed to know, I learned in camp, not kindergarten.
It's important.
So in the summer camp. And those friendships remained lifelong friendships.
Yes.
And Rabbi Feller, after reading your book, was convinced that everybody's got to read this. It's like a fundamental text for Jewish life in America.
Yes, he told me that as well. He felt that it shows, that kids like Bobby and I who didn't grow up religious, using our own brains and our own Jewish neshamas, reached out for it because we understood that it was our protection and our knowledge to get us through this life. And
so I think that it validates the Rebbe's philosophy. You know, when Europe was destroyed Jewishly, everybody was convinced that Judaism was finished because it's never going to happen in America. The reason? Because in America, you can't tell anybody what to do. You don't have the discipline of Europe. You know, you listen to the czar, you listen to the political leaders, or you get shot. So listening was part of the mentality. You had to obey. But in America, particularly in rural America, nobody told you what to do. So it wasn't going to happen. There wasn't going to be any Judaism when you don't have that kind of discipline. Or you're not going to have Judaism if you don't have anti-Semitism. They believed that what kept Jews Jewish was the fact that the society around them wouldn't accept them. So they had no choice but to be chosen or different. But in America, that wasn't going to happen. Your story, you and Bob, proved the whole thing false. Nobody told you what to do, and nobody could.
right. Except my mother about the draft.
And there was no anti-Semitism. You were perfectly comfortable in the general population and school, and the Jew is Jewish without anti-Semitism and without the czar. And that's the beauty of American Judaism. It's the real thing. It doesn't need any help from the outside. It comes from the inside. And it's just as strong and just as real. All you need is a little book learning.
And I got to tell you, when I had the fish business, I had become observant. I had hundreds of people working for me at one time, and they knew that I kept the Sabbath, the Shabbos. If it was a Friday afternoon and it was getting late, they were the first ones to tell me, "Louie, you got to go home because you're getting close to your Sabbath." They were worried that I would be late to keep the Sabbath. The non-Jews like when Jews act Jewishly and keep their faith, because they do the same in theirs, and they respect and appreciate when we do it as well, if we're believers. And I found that throughout my whole life that my non-Jewish employees and friends respected my observance.
If I remember correctly, one of your ships was hijacked, pirated.
It was seized by the Russians in the Bering Sea, right, and taken back to Siberia and claimed that they were spies or something. Yes.
And they tried to call you, but you wouldn't answer because it was Shabbos.
That's right. My phone was ringing and ringing and ringing, and I said to my wife, I said, somebody's trying to reach me, but I'm not going to answer in Shabbos. So what happened after hours of the phone ringing? This was in Duluth. Somebody hear a knock on the door. I go to the door. It's one of the guys that worked for me in my office. He said, Louie, I'm so sorry, Mr. Kemp. I'm so sorry to bother you on your Sabbath. I know this is your Sabbath, but this was so important. I thought I had to come and tell you. So what's so important? He said, the Russians have seized the Frida K, was a ship I named after my mother, Frida K, and took it to Siberia, and they won't give it back because they claim that they're spying. He said, what should I do? So I thought for a second. I said, call the insurance company. And he said, oh, okay. And that was it. And then after Shabbos, I put on CNN. I said, this guy, I wonder if he drinks or something, I put on CNN, and after a few minutes, on the screen was this big picture of the Frida K with the words on the screen saying seized, and sure enough, that's what happened. The State Department got it back for us a week later.
Louie, it sounds like there's another book. There's another book in your future.
A lot of good stories.
Guys, I remember, Larry Keegan, of course, coming to shul. I met Bob Dylan once or twice coming in and out of our house. And Louie, I never got to meet you. But you tell an interesting story about Yom Kippur in Santa Monica.
Yes.
A more recent Yom Kippur. Can you finish with that story?
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually read from the book that actual story with the exact language that I wrote in the book about that experience. Here's how it goes. It was Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement, at the tail end of the 1980s. Bobby was attending services at the Chabad House in Santa Monica. Presiding was the venerable Rabbi Avraham Levitansky, beloved and revered by his congregation. We had been there before, and the rabbi recognized Bobby right away. But few, if any, of his fellow worshipers, all somberly dressed, realized he was standing at the back of the room. Having, as usual, missed the memo regarding the dress code, Bobby was wearing cowboy boots, torn jeans, a hoodie, a black leather jacket, and what looked like a long-lost pair of Jackie Kennedy sunglasses, the big ones. Specifically, he was attending the Nila service. In Hebrew, Nila means closing the gate. As the day of Yom Kippur comes to a close and our future is being sealed, we turn to God to offer our repentance and new resolutions and ask that he seal us in the book of life. We ask him to grant us a new year, replete with goodness and happiness. The Nila ends with the blowing of the shofar, and the prayer that includes, next year may we be in Jerusalem. The ark housing the holy scrolls of the Torah remains open for the entire service, and it is considered a great honor to be chosen by the rabbi to open it. This carries with it many blessings for the new year. The honor customarily goes to the temple's most generous donor, but not this time. With his ancient eyes, Rabbi Levitansky scoured the congregation. At last his gaze came to rest upon a solitary figure standing in the back of the room. He motioned the casually dressed fellow up to the pulpit, and up he came. Bob Dylan opened the ark on Yom Kippur. Afterwards, when the last echo of the shofar had diminished to silence and most of the congregants had trickled away, the biggest donor to the temple sought out Rabbi Levitansky and pulled him aside. I want you to know, Rabbi, said the man, that when you didn't call me up to open the ark, I was quite hurt. Then I saw whom you chose, and I realized you were even wiser and kinder than I had imagined. So I'm going to double my contribution for the coming year. It takes a great, generous heart to give the honor of opening the ark for Nila to a homeless Jew. The rabbi has long since passed away, taking his spiritual secrets with him. As for the donor, unless he reads it here, he still doesn't know that the homeless Jew was Bob Dylan. Amos.
Amos. What a way to end, because of course that's what this whole conversation has been about. There is no such thing as a homeless Jew. Jews just have to come home.
That's a good point, Rabbi. You're absolutely right.
Thank you. Any last thoughts, Ta?
Well, if that story is indicative of the whole book, you got to read it.
Thank you, Rabbi.
It really is, Louie. It's an amazing pleasure to finally get to meet you. The book is amazing. May you go from strength to strength and continue to inspire many, many more people.
Thank you, Rabbi. I appreciate that blessing. If anybody wants to get more details on the book and read it, it's on Amazon. That's a picture of Bobby and I taken in 1972, hanging out. Bobby Zimmerman and Louie Kemp.
Dylan and me.
Are you doing any book signings? Oh, you can't do it today, God forbid.
Well, I had done a few, quite a few, and I had a whole bunch planned when things went down. And once it goes back up, I'll be traveling around the country doing book signings.
May it be sooner than later.
And I'll be at different Chabads. I have one already lined up, a Chabad in Berkeley, Chabad in San Francisco, Chabad in Sacramento. I've been approached by Chabads all over, and I look forward to see you at your friendly Chabad after this goes out.
Don't forget Chabad in Birmingham.
Okay, invite me, Rabbi.
You're on.
Okay, good.
Thank you, guys. Welcome, Rabbi. Ta. Thank you, JLI, for giving me a chance to spend an hour with my father.
I just want to say to Rabbi Manas Friedman, thank you for changing my life. Thank you for plucking me out of the Gullus. I have 6 children and 5 grandchildren, 1 on the way, all observant Jews because of what you taught me and what you did for me. And coming out after a long day, instead of going to your own family at 20 below zero to come and talk to answer the questions of a Jew you didn't know. Thank you for your selfless behavior towards me.
I have a nasty joke, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you have 14 kids at home to put to sleep, wouldn't you run out to the airport too?
Yeah, I think that you came because you're a selfless Jew and you care about every Jew, and you changed my life and the life of many other Jews because of it.
Well, it turns out that it was worth it.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
You're making a difference, and that's
and endless ripple effects.
Thank
One
you.
to the other.
I just want to add that Manas was kind enough when my youngest son, Eli, Elchanan Ruvain, was born. I called Manas, and he came to LA. It was a sondic for his bris. So Manas is a full service rabbi. And then he was at my wedding. He was a full service rabbi, cradle to the grave. You know, you're covered when you're with Manas.
full service. I go wherever I'm invited.
There you go. Thank you.
This was a pleasure.
Thank you.